Well, good evening, or good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Interfaith Paths to Peace. This is our lunch with Evolutionaries of the Soul, and I'm so excited today to have Jason Hiner with the Baha'i Community. Jason and I are finally able to connect, and I've been looking forward to this conversation and lunch with him for a long time now, and I know you all that are joining us will be uh, in for a real treat to have conversation with Jason. Those of you that are joining us on Facebook, I want to welcome you. You're welcome to put in a question if you have one for Jason into the chat box. And those that are joining us on Zoom, thanks for being here. A lot of fans of Jason on the call, and there'll be a chance later on. If you have a question for Jason, you're welcome to unmute yourself and join in the conversation that way. So welcome everybody, and welcome to you, Jason. If you, the idea behind Evolutionaries of the Soul are there are these people in Louisville that I do think are helping our individual and collective souls evolve. And I've been in a bunch of conversations with Jason, and I've so appreciated his Jason, you're kind of an old soul in some ways. I mean, you're so young, and yet you have a articulation and a wisdom that I just really have deeply appreciated. So, yeah, thanks for being on and sharing some of that wisdom with us today. If you'd start by, just introduce yourself and give us a little timeline of your life. So, and then we'll just jump into the conversation. Thanks, Jason. Welcome.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Judd. And first of all, pleasure to be here. I'm a longtime fan of Interfaith Paths to Peace and really deeply admire the work that Interfaith Paths to Peace has done over the past year. This has always been such an important organization in Louisville community, but has really made itself indispensable over the past year with so many of the conversations going on in this community and around social justice, around reparative justice, I think is a great way to think about it. Bringing people together who aren't usually in the same room, part of the same platform, and creating dialogue that really is making the community so much stronger, so much richer, and really building toward a better future. So thank you so much for all the work that Interfaith Paths to Peace is doing, specifically you, Judd, and all the wonderful things that you've started. So I'll say, I am not from Louisville. I've lived in Louisville since 2006. When my wife and I and our two kids, we moved here at that time, although I'd been working here since 2001, so we knew we really liked Louisville. And so essentially we've been coming to Louisville or associated with Louisville for about 20 years and love this community and are very glad to see a lot of the good positive things that are happening here. And there's a lot to like about this very special place. So before that, I was born in Fort Wayne, Indiana. My family, though, was from the East Coast. And so I actually I grew up in Philadelphia area, in Wilmington, Delaware. Wilmington, Delaware is kind of a suburb of Philadelphia. And so I grew up in that area during grade school, so like 1st to 8th grade. I lived on the East Coast while a lot of my family was still in Indiana. And then for high school and college, I moved back and I was in Indiana. I went to Indiana University. And in high school, I had a great teacher, mentor, who I learned journalism from. And so I was really interested in English and journalism. I'm also super curious about computers growing up. Like I'd been at an early, one of the schools that was an early Apple II adoptee. And so got to have early access to that. My mom put me in a computer class where we were programming, some games and things like that when I was younger. So I had a real fascination for technology too. And then when I went away to college, I intended to study journalism. but I was really interested in the internet. I remember I had an email address, which was a number at CompuServe. So it was like 7 numbers and then at CompuServe. And there was literally only one person on the planet that I knew who had an email address, and that was my uncle who worked for NASA at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory at NASA. That was the only person I could email in the entire world. But I was really fascinated by that, and I started to get news. The Associated Press set up this news feed that you could access online, and so it was amazing. I would get this news like right as it happened, and it was pretty cool to like read those stories in text-based version, online. So when I went to college, I really had this idea that what I wanted to do was work in online, be an online journalist. And the funny thing is, my professors used to say, they're like, nobody wants to read on screens, And I was like, but it's like instantaneous, and you can have all this information, and it lowers the barriers, to entry and the cost and all of that kind of thing. And they're like, well, they tried an experiment with that down in Florida with like some Macs and HyperCard, which was like this precursor to the internet. And they're like, yeah, people just don't like, reading things that way. So of course I was like, well, they don't know what they're talking about, which, they had some good points, but, being sort of an 18, 19-year-old kid, you tend to, be a little arrogant. And so I ended up not, I studied really more liberal arts for the rest of college. And then when I graduated from college, I went and worked in technology for about 4 years. And but I was freelance writing about technology. And so I combined sort of my interest in technology and journalism, and became an online journalist covering the technology industry. So that's still what I do today. But, in terms of my spiritual journey, my family was Catholic when I was growing up. And my grandmother was really just one of the sweetest, kindest people that I've ever met. And she was the first person who taught me how to pray. And I remember being 5 years old, and her teaching me how to kneel down, and teaching me the Lord's Prayer. And then I remember her reading me a story. I don't know how these two are connected, but interestingly enough, this is how I connect them in my mind. Is like, afterwards, she read me the story of that night that she taught me how to pray for the first time. She read me the story of Joan of Arc, and so which was really interesting. And so those two things are really connected to me from kind of my first approach to spirituality. And also maybe the idea was immediately connected with the idea of like gender equality a bit too, because I think she was, in her own way, I think she was she was expressing to me that the role that women can play in society, in faith, in other ways too. And so that really stuck with me. And when I was growing up, my mom is a bit of a rebel, and so she didn't really want me to go through the ritual that Catholics go through, confirmation. And there was a point where I wanted to, and the other members of the family were kind of pressuring her and pressuring me to go through. And she didn't feel like she wanted that. And there was a point where even there was a conflict a little bit between us. But I remember we would go to church together, and we had some family, and it kind of always depended on who the who the priest was. That if we liked one, we would like go to that church, and if we didn't like it, we'd say, okay, let's not go to that one. Let's go over to this one, instead. And we had family when I was growing up in Wilmington, Delaware, Philadelphia area, where we would cherry pick a little bit. We had one that we just really, really liked, and Father Tom, I remember, and he was just an amazing storyteller. an amazing story. I still remember some of his stories. I could tell them. I won't tell them now, but some of them like stick with me to this day. They were just so good and so meaningful and so powerful. And I think it was during that period where I was kind of feeling like, maybe I should kind of go through the confirmation. And I remember one day my mom said, we're not going to go to church today. And I said, okay. She said, well, instead what we're going to do is we're going to stay home and we're going to read this book. There's a book by Leo Buscaglia it was just called Love. And we read some of that together, and there's just some really beautiful, powerful, practical things in that book. And when we got done with that, one of the things that she said to me is she said, you don't have to be religious to be spiritual. And even if you are religious, that is one aspect of going to church or following a ritual, or those things are meant to help you to on your own journey, to get somewhere. It's not an end in itself. So this was essentially her message to me, and why she said, we can stay here and we can read this book, and that can be just as meaningful and important to you spiritually as it is to go to anywhere or do a ritual or be part of anything. So that was really important to me. And I remember that was my 8th grade year. It was kind of a rough year. I remember I got in a little bit of trouble at school, and I was having some challenges. And then at the end of that year, we moved actually from Wilmington, Delaware to Indiana. So it was a very tumultuous year. And that was the first time that I remember that, since that time when I prayed with my grandma, where myself, like, I got on my knees and actually prayed, because I felt like so many things in my life were control and needed direction. And I just was, it's one of those lowest point stories of like, I'm at the lowest point. I kind of like give over, and I sort of, for the first time on my own, asked for help, from a higher power, from God, the universe, however, anybody wants to think about it. I got on my knees and I prayed for help. And I remember from that time on, pretty much almost from that one moment where I did that, almost every night after that, I did consistently. And so much so that my cousin would come over and stay at our house. And sometimes I would say, before we would go, and I had like 2 beds in my room, and before I would, we would go to sleep, we would be talking, and I say, okay, before, we turn out the lights to go to sleep, I'm gonna say my prayers. And I remember him always saying, all right, put in a good word with the big guy for me. And so, so even from a kid, I was like, when I was like 15 or something, 16, and I just remember my cousin he would come over and stay with us a lot. He would always say, all right, put in a good word with the big guy, for me. So those are some of the things I remember from my childhood spiritually. And then, when I was 19 was when I learned about the Baha'i faith. And it was, I'll cut this short, Judge, so we can you can ask some questions about it. But basically
you're all good. You're talking about all those things I'd ask about. So
okay.
Keep going.
All right, good. So when I was 19, it was right after I graduated, the month after I graduated, or the month I had graduated from high school. I was with some couple of my closest friends, visiting a brother and sister, visiting their family in Chicago. And we were supposed to do, it was almost like a graduation. We were going to do like Hard Rock Cafe and Science and Industry Museum and maybe the aquarium. We were going to sort of like, live it up around Chicago. And it was the Taste of Chicago that weekend, which Taste of Chicago like shuts down the whole city. Like you can't get anywhere downtown. So we were like sitting around like kids do, and everybody's kind of going, well, what are we going to do? Let's go do something. And finally, and my friend, he was a year ahead of us. He was at Purdue, and he was in drafting, and he had to draw something. So he was going to draw something, I think, at the Hard Rock Cafe. So he's like, look, guys, I need to draw something. So can we go somewhere where I could at least, have something to draw for this assignment, that I'm working on for his summer class? And his cousin goes, oh, we should go to the Baha'i temple. And so we were like, okay. Um, and so and then he said, our parents had been there, just went there. One of them said, yeah, our parents went there and they really loved it. They said it was beautiful. The people were so really engaging. And they said, okay. And we were like, look, let's do anything. Let's just go do something, So we went to the Baha'i temple, and I remember in my mind, I had, the idea of it was going to be one of these, because we were in the suburbs. So we were in the northern suburbs of Chicago. And, in the suburbs, all of the houses of worship look pretty similar, right? They're like all these brown brick buildings, mostly pretty square. So I kind of imagined we were just going to this like square. I didn't know what he wanted to draw there, but I thought, okay. And I imagine I would go there, and I had the worst stereotypes in my head, right? It would be people with turbans on and that kind of thing, that because it sounded Middle Eastern to me. That I didn't know anything. I don't think I'd ever heard the word Baha'i before that day. But for whatever reason, that idea of something, maybe they even mentioned that it was Middle Eastern or something. So that was what I imagined. I imagined kind of stereotypical kind of ideas. And we went, and when we pulled up, so I was in the back seat, they were in the front seat. They were like, "Is that it?" And I can't see anything because it's so tall, like it's very large, and it's this giant structure, and it's white. And this was a beautiful day at the end of June. It was 75 degrees. It's right on the on Lake Michigan. So it was a beautiful day. So it's just shimmering in the white, and so they're like talking about, wow, how amazing it is. And then we turn into it, and then I look up and it's like, oh my gosh, like it's gigantic and it's really beautiful. And so we got out and we're walking through the gardens, and my friend starts to draw, and the gardens are so beautiful too, very powerful. So we got there, and the architecture is just striking. And somebody said, so I think that because they had been there before, they had a little bit of an idea. And so they told me, they said, it's got, because it kind of looks like a giant circle with a dome. And they said, it's 9 sides. And so, and then but the idea is, because they said that main idea of the Baha'i faith is unity. So there's 9 sides, and they represent the fact that there are different paths to God, or to the mystery of the universe, to the creator. But when you enter that central dome, you're united. And I was like, okay, that's, I'd never heard anything like that before. So we went in, they said, well, why don't we go inside? And I was like, okay. So we left our one friend to draw in the gardens, and then we went inside. And the only thing that I remember, or the main thing I remember from that moment when we sort of went in, is my friends, they kind of said something like, we're going to go do XYZ. I don't remember. I think there's some prayer books you can pick up, and they went and sat down, I think, and were reading. And I kind of started wandering, because I looked, and above each of the doors, there were words. There was like a quote above each one of the doors. And it was things like, all the prophets of God proclaim the same faith. The earth is but one country, and mankind its citizens. And a number of very powerful things like that. So I walked around, and I was like reading each one, and I was so kind of mesmerized. And when I got around, I completely lost track of my friends. I walked around, I read all of those, and I came to the last one, and I was so kind of in awe of that. And there was just this feeling of like, in that spot, like when I got to the end, then I started looking around inside and looking out the windows, and I felt like this sense of like calmness that I really had never kind of, had before. And so when I looked out the windows, the crazy thing is, when I looked out the window in that moment, I looked out and literally like everything seemed more vibrant. Like the trees seemed greener and the ocean seemed like deeper and more powerful. And to me, like in that moment, the best I could express it, and I've said it before, is like it just felt like the entire universe was like was there in that moment. And I felt the smallest I'd ever felt before. And I realized how I felt also like completely ignorant. I felt like so small and almost like completely like, how could this exist? And I had no idea. And how could I not have known that this was a thing? And so it started this curiosity for me of, well, if this existed and I didn't know about it, what else in the world is out there that I don't know about? And so for about a year after that trip there, I went and I read everything I could about like philosophy, about every other religion I could find: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism. I read like just everything I could, and about, like I said, philosophy and different thinkers and all that. Cause I just was like, what I knew, I felt like was so small and narrow and confined. And by learning about this, like I realized there's a lot out there in the world that I just have no clue about, and I needed to learn. And so that kind of started me on my journey. Sorry, that was
Oh,
a
that's
long.
such a no, that's so beautiful, and you articulate that so well. I can tell you're a journalist, but also very articulate speaking. So, thank you for that. So, well, guys, that brings up so many questions. Well, talk a little bit more about some of the basic tenets of the Baha'i tradition. I think it's one of these traditions that people don't know a lot about.
Yeah.
And so talk about some of those tenets, and then maybe one that is the most meaningful to you or that you really connect with. Um, yeah, can you share some of that?
Yeah.
And I don't think people
Sure.
realize that in the Baha'i tradition, you don't have paid clergy. You have
Yeah.
a a group of people that take responsibility, and that's one of the things that's so fabulous about that paradigm, is that everybody in the community is educated, and like they have a right for leadership, and so everybody has voice. And I've been in very few communities where as many members can articulate the basics of their faith tradition so well as the Baha'i tradition. And I think that's because you don't depend upon religious clergy to be those people. It's everybody that takes those roles and responsibilities. So anyway, yeah, talk some about that. I'm sorry, those were like 8
Yeah.
questions. So really, you just share whatever you want to say.
No, that's great, Judd. And you articulate so many things about the Baha'i faith, very well too. So yeah, and we can certainly come back to the idea of the structure a little bit, because it really is about the structure, the future structure of society, right? And individuals taking more responsibility in their community, I think is the main idea. So that's one of the when I had that first visit to the Baha'i faith, to the Baha'i House of Worship in Illinois, in Wilmette, Illinois, north of Chicago. Um, I remember there was like a pamphlet, like a program. I flipped it over, and on the back there was like these, principles, some of the principles of the Baha'i faith, equality of women and men, the elimination of all forms of prejudice, the oneness of humanity is really the central tenet of the Baha'i faith, because really the central idea from Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, was that we're entering into the next stage of human, the evolution of human society, and that the next stage is the unification of all the peoples of the world into one common fellowship, into one global community, and that is what will enable both peace as well as global prosperity. It will help solve the problems when we see ourselves, when our highest loyalty is to the whole human race. Not that we don't have loyalties to our community or our nation. Those things, there are necessary dividing, not dividing lines, but organizational lines that need to be drawn just for, practicality. But when our highest value is, our highest loyalty is to the whole human race, that will solve so many of the problems that we're facing, whether it's economic, environmental, whether it's exploitation of one group of people over another, warfare between tribes, between different groups of whatever kind. That is the teaching that is most meaningful and most, I think, powerful for me. When I learned that, it was in 1992 was when I made that trip to the house of worship, the Baha'i house of worship. And that summer was an Olympic year. And that summer there was the first time in a long time I wanted in a lot of Olympics, going back decades and decades, where there were no boycotts. So I remember I had just made this trip to the Baha'i house of worship. Then that Olympics happened, and I thought, okay, I'm starting to see some of this, right? Some of this is starting to happen. And that was really powerful to me. And I wrote an article about that I had, as part of working as a journalist, the Fort Wayne News Sentinel in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I wrote a monthly column for them. They had a teen section, and I wrote a monthly column. And so my last column before I left for college, I wrote about I made to worship, and then the fact that I saw all of this playing out, or starting, the seed of it at the Olympics, and how kind of meaningful that was to me. That idea, that the answer to a lot of the problems and a lot of the challenges facing humanity was this idea of the oneness of humanity, which seems so simple at its core, but yeah, super powerful.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the gifts. The Baha'i tradition, we say, is one of the newest, maybe the newest world religion, and a fast-growing world religion, because it's able to take those principles. I mean, there's been so many principles of world religions that have been based upon exclusion, or we're the only way, and the inclusiveness of the Baha'i tradition, I think, is one of the reasons why it's becoming so attractive to people. How about, let's get into a little more, like, have there been times in your own, you talked about that one time when you were 9, and praying as a Catholic, but how is the Baha'i community or the resources of the Baha'i tradition supported you in the midst of your own kind of either personal or spiritual kind of crisis or dark times? How's that function for you?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's an important one, because this is one of the things that I say to people that are anybody that's coming to grips with their own religiosity, or membership in a religion, or spiritual journey, is that these things are there. And I get this obviously from my mom and that conversation we had. Like, these things are there to give meaning to your life, right? So you have to look to them to provide meaning, but they are a means more than an end. And so for me, I had that one prayer from Jesus that we have from the Bible that's so powerful, the Lord's Prayer, which millions of people, there's probably hundreds of thousands of people saying that prayer at this very moment, right, all around the world. That one prayer we had from Jesus, essentially teaching us a little bit about how to pray, right, was so meaningful for so much of my life, and carried so much weight and value. And when I learned about the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, who really portrayed himself as the latest in this long line of teachers that have come to humanity. Moses, Abraham, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Muhammad. And all of them, to an extent, did some of that, right? They taught us a little bit of, here's how to approach, this unapproachable essence of a creator. Because if there truly is, right, a creator that can create all of the things that are here, it must be an intelligence, a powerful essence that's above our comprehension to a degree, right? So they all teach it. So Baha'u'llah had a number of these prayers as well, where essentially he prayed, and through reading those prayers, we learn also a little bit of that. So he had many of these, and so those prayers became really meaningful to me. And when I went to college, I left for college a few months after I had this experience. And I took this Baha'i prayer book with me when I went to college. And somebody read my article. So there was a Baha'i in Fort Wayne who read my article, and she called me at college. And it's funny because it was the day when I got to college. I'd been there for a couple of weeks, and college is a little crazy, right? And so I remember feeling like I was at a point where I needed a little spiritual pick me up. And right next to my dorm was actually the Catholic Student Center. And I was like, oh, that's right next door. I can go over there and I'll sort of see what's going on there, because I could use a little, jolt of spirituality. And I went next door, and it was closed for renovation. And I was like, oh, man. And so I thought, well, all right, I'll figure something out. And like that same day, I get a call, and there's this call from this Baha'i in Fort Wayne. And she's like, hey, I read your article, and I just want you to know that there are a bunch of students and people in Bloomington who think like you and really, believe a lot of these things that you're really drawn to. And I think you should, look them up. And so she gave me like the name of a person and all of that. And I thought, I'm going to do that. And then I looked, and because I was still sort of needing this little jolt of spirituality, the one thing I had brought with me to college was that Baha'i prayer book. That was like the only thing I had packed. And so I opened that up, and during, freshman year in college is like a tumultuous time, and so that just there started me to where, I was still in this habit of praying, every evening. And so I started using those prayers, and I wasn't a Baha'i, at this point. And so it really became meaningful to me, and really throughout the rest of my, life up until now, in the same way that when I was younger, that the Lord's Prayer did the same for me, was such a way to, come back to myself, come back to what I felt like is my true self, that sort of find that like calm place within me. The Baha'i prayers do that to me in such a, same way, powerful way, and on so many different topics, because instead of having kind of one, there's, literally dozens, maybe hundreds. Yeah.
And Jason, one of the things that I think you do this personally, but I also feel this encouraged in the Baha'i community. Well, one, well, there's two things here. Your integrative capacity to integrate other sources of meaning and other sacred texts that the Baha'i community encouraged, because it actually reads those in its assembly time, its community time. But also these mystical writings. I mean, we've often connected around doing Lectio Divina when we were connecting around poetry and things like that. What are the kind of the mystical elements of the Baha'i tradition? Because and share some about the scriptures or the sacred texts of the Baha'i tradition. Because I don't think people are aware of the different kind of sacred texts that are used. And then also, if you could describe what it looks like when your community gathers, because I think that's a really powerful piece of the Baha'i community.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Jed. So Baha'i scripture has, Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, his ministry, his time, from the time he calling as a prophet to his death was about 40 years. So so he left a steady stream of writings throughout that time, and that's the core scripture of the Baha'i faith. He also had a forerunner called the Bab. Ali Muhammad was his name, was his given name, but the Bab means the gate. And so that was what the name that he took. And he had a very short ministry, very similar to Jesus. It was only 6 years. And so but in that, he also had a number of beautiful writings, religious, many very mystical, like you were saying, Jed. And so he was the two of them, their works, in somewhat of a similar way to like John the Baptist and Jesus, right? Their connection was there. They left behind a lot of writings in their own words. And one of the things that's really powerful is that they talk a little bit about the process of revelation, this very mystical process of what it was like to receive a revelation, which would have been amazing if we could have gone back and asked, Jesus or Moses or Buddha, and some of them, there's a little bit of that. Muhammad, same thing. Muhammad told some beautiful, powerful stories too, but there's so much more detail and so much more there. So that's, their writings make up a lot. And there are very practical writings about the things that you can do that can help you to develop, spiritually. There are things to develop community life. Really, some of the most powerful are some of these ideas around how communities can develop now. Because one of the things Baha'u'llah said, this is the coming of age of humanity, that we're living at a time. And when you're coming of age, it's time for you to take more responsibility for yourself, right? It's that bridge from childhood to adulthood. And that's the stage we're going through. It's a very time with a lot of upheaval in your life, typically. And we've seen that in humanity, right? That's why the last several centuries, we've gone through, horrible wars, terrible oppression, genocide, the environmental, the things that we've done to the planet, showing a lot of really irresponsible acts, right? And much the way a teenager would when they're driving a car too fast, or, taking something that they should be taking more responsibility for and they don't, that's kind of like us with the environment, right? And so you see the manifestations of that all throughout the world and sort of the recent history of humanity. But part of it is this idea of community life that Baha'u'llah said was that is the time for there not to be clergy any longer, that they performed a valuable trait in the past. A lot of times, a person who was clergy was the only person who could read in the community. And they were expressing to the other people, they were sharing, they would read. Other people were busy, whatever, farming or taking care of animals or, building things or all of that. And so it was a useful division of labor, right? For one person to study and be able to read and then to share those things with others. But we've reached the point now where it's important, and it's part of the responsibility of everybody to read for themselves, to study, to reflect, to consider. And as part of that, that's the grassroots building of what the next level of society is as well. Like, it's time for everybody to take a responsibility in the destiny and the shape of their own community. So that's a part of it. Obviously, the Baha'i community itself tries to reflect that, but it's also an idea for the larger society as well, to start to think of that way in a more, as you'd say, like a more integrative way, right? To integrate their own life with the life of the community. And that's a lot more responsibility. You have responsibility for your own spiritual well-being. You have responsibility for the health and the welfare of your own community. But starting from the grassroots. And so that's an important and really important part of kind of the next stage of these things.
And shares, when someone were to come to a gathering or one of your services, I love the kind of flow of what that looks like. And I also, since you're the only community I've gone to, I don't know if this is the norm for all, but the kind of liturgy's not the word, but kind of the order of gathering is really beautiful. Describe that some, and maybe what's one of your favorite parts about that for you personally, your
Yeah.
gathering time?
Okay. Sure. So yeah, the community comes together. Typically we have the Baha'i community has a number of different types of gatherings, but devotional gatherings, I think, are maybe the most kind of familiar and the most common, and um, the part that is where everyone especially is open, of all backgrounds, of all beliefs or no belief, to join in. I've had friends that have come to these that are atheists, and they even like the reading of the prayers. I like that you read them, and you don't just read something else right away. Sometimes you'll sit on it a little bit and let it sit in. I had one of my friends who was an atheist, and I used to say there's a little kind of prayer for travelers, for traveling. And I used to say it sometimes when we would drive from like Bloomington up to Indianapolis. I'd say, hey, do you mind if I say this little traveling prayer? And he would say, no, that's fine. And then I remember one time I forgot. He said, hey, you didn't do the traveling prayer. And I was like, oh, right. And he said, I just feel better that when you're doing it, he said, the way I think about it, when you're doing it, you're putting this intention out into the universe that you want to be safe. You want to, you want to do this well. And he said, that's enough for me, but I feel better when you do it before we get going. So, but in terms of our devotional meetings, the Baha'i devotional meetings, we gather before we, try to greet each other and catch up. It's a little harder on Zoom, but, we have a little bit of informal time first where, we just shoot the breeze a little bit, for sometimes 5, 10, 15 minutes. And then, the readings sometimes is picked out by one person, although there's also times where different people will all bring one with to the meeting. It can take many different forms and in different kinds of communities throughout the world, because the Baha'i faith is established in over 200 countries. And obviously the Baha'i literature has been translated into over 800 languages and dialects. And so it takes different forms in different localities. So it is a little bit malleable based on sort of the needs of the community, based on some of their own past traditions of the way they're used to worshiping, or they can bring some of their own culture to it, right? Where it has that can help bring meaning to it. But here, for example, on Zoom, we get together every Sunday morning. We have a program that's planned around a certain topic. So we did recently the environment. That was a very popular one. We had very engaging discussion afterwards. So yeah, so what we did is one person typically will bring the writings together from the Baha'i faith, but also from other sacred traditions throughout the world. Some of the great, readings and literature of the past, as well as even sometimes modern thinkers will, when it makes sense, right, bring a few of those kinds of things in to tie in with the topic. There'll be typically some music, which is often Baha'i writing set to music from people around the world in different languages. We'll play a little bit of that. Sometimes some live music, because music is the ladder to the soul. It has such a powerful effect beyond words and beyond just thinking about it. And then afterwards, we have a little bit of time for reflections, for questions, for some dialogue, to really exchange ideas. And that's in America, or at least in Louisville community. That's our approach, and that's fairly common, I think, throughout the U.S. But these devotional gatherings do take a lot of different forms, even in Louisville. And then we have some of our members here, Britt and Rita, Nancy, others that could even talk about some of the different forms that these things take. It really amazes me, the diversity even in our own community that some of these gatherings can take, that have meaning in different contexts and to different groups, and they can help them in where they're at spiritually and what they're facing and going through, and what's going to be useful for them.
So if one of the things I was so impressed with when I attended was your nurturing and caring of children, and the cultivation of children through these stages of development spiritually. And a lot of time in traditional religion, I shouldn't say traditional religion. Sometimes, religion has been seen as actually arrested development for people. Like, that
Mm.
it doesn't encourage higher states of thinking or critical thought or, higher spiritual states. And I think the nurturing of children in the Baha'i tradition, and just, I mean, you've had your daughter on. You often, their kids are included kind of in this rhythm of the community. Um, yeah, share some about that and how you're nurturing your family in that tradition.
Sure. Yeah, that's such an important question, and it's interesting to hear your perspective on that too, because we're always thinking like we need to do more to integrate the children, let them take on some of the responsibility for these things, let them step forward and be the ones that are doing some of the reading, let them help to guide some of the direction that we want to go. And impressively, even there was a 6-year-old in the community this year that wanted to host her own devotional on Zoom. And she did, which is incredible. Her and her sister, who is 8, they hosted their own devotional and they like ran the Zoom, they let people in, they muted and unmuted people. It was incredible, right? They planned the readings, they and musical selections as well. So it is true. So in the Baha'i community, the education of children, and really when I say education of children, it's not meant in the sense of indoctrination. It really is meant in the what I think what we might call like the development of virtues. So the core curriculum of education is really this the idea of virtues, because virtues are what cut across all of the sacred traditions. There was this virtues project that did this, and there's a group now called Virtues Matters that does this. That they looked across in Virtues Project. If you let me have a slight aside, they researched what is it that humans value across all cultures, and they looked at First Nations, they looked at all of the religious traditions of the world, and they found that there's about these 300 core values that everybody essentially has some value on. And out of those, they broke it down to about 100 to 150. And the 150, they created these cards, virtues cards. And now they have an app, Virtues Cards. If you look that up on Google or Apple, you can download it. But those virtues are shared throughout all the sacred traditions, which is amazing, right? The unity and the connectedness of those things, those shared values. So, it really does point to perhaps there is something that unites us, and that is sort of higher than what we're often conscious of at a daily level. So, but that's a lot similar to like the Baha'i education for children. The core education is because if you can learn compassion, if you can learn patience, if you can learn these other things, it's going to serve you in whatever way you go in life, right? And whatever your path is. And so there are, we invite people of all faiths to participate in those children's classes. We really see them as education for the entire community. Same thing with our junior youth program that's aged between like 11 and 15, is often kind of like the lost, sometimes called like the lost years. That's an age when kids are really developing their own sense of self and identity. And often they're just not given that much attention, and they don't feel like kids anymore, but they're not quite mature enough to be on their own. And they don't usually have the self-confidence yet to, step out and do that kind of thing. So in the last couple decades, Baha'is have put special emphasis on that age and have a series of books called the Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program. And these, again, are not indoctrination texts. These are about kids facing moral and ethical challenges for the first time and helping them make about those things that can have meaning in their life. It's about going through difficult things when bad things happen to good people, and and maybe something happens to somebody in your family and it seems unjust or unfair, or how do you deal with that? And so it's a lot of those kinds of kids, helping kids to develop their own ethical framework to be able to face the world and face their own responsibility and their own place, in society. So those are really important, those programs. And they really, both of them are made not just for the Baha'i community and Baha'i children, but they are made for the entire community to come and participate. And throughout the whole world, especially that junior youth program, about 50% of all the participants in that, even though they're hosted by Baha'is, are not members of the Baha'i community. They're members of the larger community. So it's a pretty powerful thing. And it's something that we're still learning a lot too. Like I say that we're doing it, but we're learning, and we're learning from everybody that participates. And people can come in and participate and go through it and not be members of our community, and they can become facilitators in those programs, just as easily as someone who's a Baha'i as well.
Yeah. Thank you. And I've had the joy of asking all these questions, and we have just a great group of people that are on. So I want to open it up to see if there's anybody that has a question that's on. Feel free to unmute yourself and make a comment or ask Jason a question. Does anybody have anything they want to say? This is an open time to do that.
Hey, Judd.
Hey, Terry. So good to see you.
Hey. Oh my God, it's so good to be here. I'm so curious, Jason, about, I'm going to use the word transition, your faith development, maybe is a better term, and the Baha'i faith as well. But the clear question hasn't come to me, but I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that personal information. I know it can feel a little awkward sometimes, and you're like, oh, maybe I said too much. I don't know if you feel that way, but I do sometimes. But I really appreciate that. That in and of itself is a gift to me, and I appreciate how you've, the Baha'i faith seems like a perfect place for you because of your curiosity and your willingness. And it reminds me a little bit of the Jewish tradition as well, is that, that encouragement to ask questions and to seek. And I really have a great appreciation for that. And so now I'm even more motivated. I tried to research and find a Baha'i community here in Columbia, where I live now, and I haven't found one. So maybe I'll jump in with you guys some Sunday morning. But just thanks so much for sharing and helping me get to know the tradition a little bit better. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry, and great to see you. And thanks for everything you do. It was so great being part of several of the devotions that you led last year with IPP and that. And so you are an inspiration. So thanks so much for being here. It's an honor to see you.
Are there any other, thanks, Terry. Any other questions or comments from folks on the call? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Yeah, Rita, did you have a comment, question?
I'd just like to make a few comments. First of all, I want to thank Jason so much for wonderful presentation and sharing his personal journey to becoming a Baha'i. And a couple of things. You asked a question about mysticism, Judd. There are a couple of books in the Baha'i faith that specifically are around that subject. Baha'u'llah, actually, some of the books he wrote were more like general or inclusive. They had a lot of different kinds of topics and things, but then there were also some that were very specific in a way, you could say. There's a book called The Seven Valleys, which is really totally about the mystical journey of the seeker, and it's very interesting book to read. And it's one of these ones that you can never get a full understanding of, but always find something in there, and Baha'u'llah quotes Rumi some. Some people are familiar with him. Another book that he wrote, which is not quite as deeply mystical, but has a lot of mystical aspects to it, it's called The Hidden Words. And it's little short passages, most of them aren't more than a paragraph, about different aspects of life and of the mystical journey. So if people are interested in that subject, those are the two Baha'i books that I would recommend for them. And then, like I said, others are more concerned with with history or the virtues like Jason mentioned. That's another thing. And concerning our programs for junior youth and children, another thing we encourage besides what was mentioned is for them to do service to the community. And so like our junior youth group, they've done a couple of programs where they've collected clothing and for people that need it, and food and so on. And I mean, the community in general does that, but we also, that's another way we encourage youth, because, you know, as Jason said, that age group especially is neglected. And really, that is a very, it's a difficult, challenging age, because physically you're going through all these hormonal changes and everything. And then there's, and now there's all this peer pressure, not just from your group in school, but online and everything else. And so these young people really need something to help them balance all that, so that they don't get just sucked into this materialistic world we have that is just constantly impinging on every aspect of our lives and telling us, you know, how we should think, how we should look, what we should buy, you know, and making young people feel like that's the only purpose in life. And so this junior youth program is, I think, very important in that, and that it gives them another way of looking at the world. And we also have books for adults. Jason mentioned the devotionals. We have study groups as well. And we have a group of books which are based on the Baha'i writings, but they're topic oriented, called the Rui books. And you don't have to be a Baha'i. Anybody is welcome, again, to study these books with us and, you know, find out, you know, what our perspective is on different issues that are dealt with in these books. So those are just a couple of things that I wanted to mention. Yeah. And I'll let somebody else.
Thank you, Rita.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and thanks for
Rita.
yeah, Jason, do you have anything you want to follow up with there? Or?
Yeah, no, that's great. The Ruhi books are kind of like the adult classes, you know, but also, you know, I mean, teenagers sometimes are involved in those as well. But it's just a series of courses for people, study groups to study together, and those are very meaningful as well, especially for people that are just looking for meaningful conversations, you know, elevated conversations. Those are a great opportunity for people to come together. And, you know, in a lot of parts of the world too, Baha'is in a similar way, you know, trying to be more outward facing with the community, they'll say, okay, we'll have one of these together, do one of these studies, but then afterwards they'll consult about, okay, what can we do? How can we put this into action in our own community? So there are places where Baha'is are offering these kinds of study groups, and then afterwards people are truly just having consultations about what does it mean if we want to sort of put some spiritual principles to work in our community. What are ways that we could do? You know, and sometimes we need to work on clean water. Sometimes it means we need to work on social justice. Sometimes it means we need to help parents who you know, don't have enough support. So it can mean many, many things, you know, and from the grassroots, from really almost the neighborhood level, those things are kind of what's encouraged in the Baha'i faith. And that's really, you know, starting to, as we talked about at the beginning, you know, rethink the DNA of society, right? Is that from the grassroots, if people take that kind of responsibility and consult about what's best for the community and ways that we can work together to make things better, you know, that's where you sort of transform society from the ground up, right? Because we've lived in, sorry for a little bit of a rant on this, but, you know, the thing is throughout history, because I know you asked about this with leadership, you know, Judd, of, you know, like I don't consider myself a leader in the Baha'i community for Louisville. I'm a collaborator. And we have so many, you know, people with outstanding perspectives and experiences that are so diverse. And part of the challenge that we have with society, and why there have been challenges with corruption and exploitation and all of these things, is throughout society, throughout history, we've had these very hierarchical, as people became more clustered into cities, society became more hierarchical, and that's where you had, the need for leadership in these very hierarchical structures that were very needed when we first were bringing people together to make sure that there was organization and not chaos. Now are sometimes a barrier to the development of society, and they create more stratification, economic stratification, different kinds of stratification. And so, sorry, I know that's getting into the sort of the big picture of it, but that's where my brain goes when we start talking about these things.
Well, no, and that's one of the reasons, Jason, I wanted to have you on, is because of that, your ability to do that. Well, Jason, I just want to deep bow to you, and I so appreciate your presence in our community, and the way you the way you move in the world. Thanks for helping us evolve as a community, and I look forward to more opportunities to collaborate with you in the Baha'i community and all the good work that you are doing. So, Jason, thank you, and blessings. And for all of you that participated, thanks for being here and just being present. And for those that are joining us on Facebook, actually the Facebook Live thing didn't take, so we're going to post it. I'll post it or download it and record it and put it back up on Facebook so you can see it again there. Well, Jason, any final words or thoughts from you? Thank you for being on today.
Yeah, sure thing. Always a pleasure to be with you. Always a pleasure to have dialogue with you, Judd. And really, I honor you and all the work that you're doing. Just in awe of everything you do, community. So thank you. Wonderful spending time with you. And if there are people who want more information on the Louisville Baha'i community, you can go to louisvillebaha'i.org. We also have a Louisville Baha'is is the Facebook page of Louisville Baha'is. You can find information on Devotional Gatherings and on our community. And then for people, more information on the Baha'i faith, you can go to baha'i.us or baha'i.org. There's information there. And BahaiBlog.net is also kind of a good, fun individual initiative from some Baha'is putting together, writing articles and stories and music and all kinds of kind of fun stuff there as well.
Well, fabulous. Thanks for sharing those resources. I feel like even though I'm not officially a Baha'i, you all have accepted me and loved me, and I deeply appreciate your community, and hope folks in Louisville will check it out as well. So thank you all for joining us today. And again, on most Wednesdays, we have programs. We're taking a few weeks off in May, but we'll jump back in June on Wednesdays, having conversations with Louisville Evolutionaries. So please look for more and join us in those conversations. Thank you all. Peace. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.